Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. As I mentioned in my last video, I've been doing more with Octoprint lately. So I wanted to do a quick overview on how to control your printer using it. We're going to walk through just the basics of the UI, what everything means, kind of the pros and cons of using that versus using the control panel on the printer, and then show you how to actually upload a file via Cura or just drag a 3D object file into it and then kick off a print. So before we get started, make sure you guys smash that like button and subscribe, and let's jump over to the computer. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. This video is really a sequel to the first video I did on setting up Octoprint for the first time. So if you don't have Octoprint set up, please check out that video first. I'll link to it in the description below. It'll walk you through that entire process. In this video, I'm going to focus on going through everything in the user interface here, kind of going over what they're for and then how to actually use it. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started on that. The first thing I wanted to go over here is actually connecting to your printer. I've got two printers set up here. I've got my Ender 3 Pro and a TAS 6. So I'll walk you through that process. If you only have one printer set up, let's just say you had the Ender 3 Pro, just leave your serial port to auto and then your rates to auto as well, and then you can connect. You can also set it to auto connect on server startup if that's something you want to do. So let's go ahead and connect to that. I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, and now we're connected. So let me go ahead and disconnect from this again, and I'll show you how to actually do it if you had more than one printer set up, really. So I did want to point out that auto connect with two printers, it connected, sure, but it connected to the wrong printer because we're just telling it to connect to whatever it's seeing, and it actually connected to the TAS 6 even though it was told it to connect to the Ender 3. It doesn't know the difference, so unless you specifically call out the serial port, it's going to connect to whatever it sees. So that's why if you have one printer and only one printer connected to the Raspberry Pi, you can get away with using auto for both. If you have more than one, you're going to have to go through the process of mapping out which is which. So in this example here, this ACM0 is connected to my TAS, and USB 0 is going over to my Ender 3. So let's go ahead and connect to the Ender 3 again. Set this to auto. I always do the rates at auto so it adjusts as needed. Alright, so if I do a connect here, it should be quicker, and yeah, now we're good. Alright, so that covers connecting to your printer. Now let's go over what it looks like if you're actually trying to print a file. Alright, so I just have a couple of examples down here that I was playing with before, just heat towers and a bridge test. So if I wanted to load one, you just click on it and then you can go to load, or you can do load and print. I prefer to do load just so I can review settings before kicking off the print. It's just easier for me to do it that way. It gives me more control. But if you know for sure that you're wanting to print it, you can just do load and print. You can see under the state section that your connection is operational, and then you have the file name that you just loaded, the uploaded time, and the approximate filament and print time. And both of these are going to be an estimate. If you mouse over this, you'll see it gives a more exact number, which is still going to be an estimate, but it does round up. And this is not in grams like you would be used to seeing. It's, in this example, it's 1.89 meters. So you would have that much filament come off the spool. So if you were to just unroll 1.89 meters, or let's just say 5 feet, that's how much filament would be used for this. So it's just calculating it in a different way. It is decently accurate. You just got to be aware that it's not in grams like you're used to seeing. Alright, so let's jump over to the temperature area. This is going to be the default screen that you would see every time you log in. Down here, you'd have your tool, or if you have more than one extruders, you'll see both of them here, and then your bed. This is showing you the current actual temperatures, and then your target temperature, and then if you have to do any offsets to account for any known differences. I've never had to actually use offsets before, but the main thing that you'd be using here quite frequently would be your target temperature for the extruder. So for example, if you go here and go down to set PLA, it's going to start heating for PLA. So now you can see that it set the target temperature at 180, Every time I scroll over to show you, it goes to off because that's where it's at that point in time. But it shows 180 Celsius, and then the actual right now is 34.8. All right, but let's go ahead and turn that back off. So if you wanted to turn everything off, you just go to off here, and then same down here. I do have this preheat plugin. This section, this little button here wouldn't be there if I didn't have the plugin. What it does is, once you load the file, if you wanted to just preheat to the temperature defined in that file for both the extruder and the bed, just hit that. It's going to load the preheats from the file and then start heating everything up. So I'll go over how to install that here shortly. All right, so let's go and scroll down here. Under this file section, these are the files that have been imported into the Raspberry Pi, either from Cura or just from direct uploads. We'll walk through both of those here in a second. I did want to point out here that, like I said, these are on the Raspberry Pi. You could do upload to SD. You would have to initialize the SD card on the printer itself, so it'd have to be there, and you'll have to pretty much wipe it and reinitialize it with the settings for Octoprint, and then you would copy the files over to that instead of having it on the actual Octoprint server. It'd be on the local printer. That process is slow and, in my opinion, kind of pointless unless you have an unstable connection from the Raspberry Pi to Octoprint. I'm sorry, unless you have an unstable connection from the Raspberry Pi to your printer. So pretty much 10 times out of 10, that's not going to be the case. But if you are one of the exceptions, then you can upload the files directly to the SD card. All right, so I have a file down here. It's just Baby Yoda. If I wanted to drag it in, you can do upload locally, which is what we were just talking about, where I'd put it on the Raspberry Pi, or upload to the SD card. It does mention here that it's not initialized, so it won't even go through the process. Again, I don't use this side of it, so I would just drop it over here. It's going to upload the file. And there you see it. There's a new one. Then we can go ahead and load it and then get all the data up here. As you can see up here, it doesn't have any of the data yet. It does take time for it to read this from the file. I believe in several minutes or so. If you go back to it or reload it, it should be there. But when you just upload the file either through Cura or directly from the file itself using this interface, that data is not there like it is here. But it will be in, I don't know the exact time. Typically, if I'm looking back like 5 minutes later, I'll see the data. So just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and remove this, and I'll show you what it looks like to upload it through Cura. Alright, so we have Cura up here. I'll go ahead and drag this STL file in of Baby Yoda. If you haven't set up Cura to work with Octoprint yet, you can walk through the video I was talking about earlier where it's the complete setup guide. I walk you through that process as well. But if you are planning on using Octoprint and Cura, it's well worth having that plugin set up. So make sure you check that out. Alright, so let's just go ahead and slice this. It doesn't really matter for the settings right now because I'm not going to print it. Alright, slicing. This shouldn't take long. Alright, so now that it's sliced, as you can see, we can save the file or print with Octoprint. Last time I did a slice, I saved it to file, so that's why it went there first. Typically, it would go to print with Octoprint first. So let's go ahead and check that. And then you can see here it's sending the file over, and it also brings up the camera here that I have set up as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and minimize this, and let's show you what it looks like over in Octoprint. Alright, so it did automatically go ahead and try to kick off the print. I'm going to go ahead and cancel it, so just go to cancel. If you wanted to pause the print, you can just hit pause as well. But let's just go ahead and cancel before it starts actually printing anything. It was starting to do the preheat. Alright, so that was the process of uploading the file with Cura. As you can see, it wasn't very difficult, but it will automatically start the print. So let's go ahead and just leave this here and move over to the control section. Alright, so now that we're in the control tab, I did want to point out that this change filament section down here is not here by default. It's a plugin. I covered that in the video that I did last week. I'll add a link in the description below to it if you're interested. Basically, it allows you to do your filament change remotely, minus swapping out the actual filament itself, of course. All right, so here we've got a couple things. We got our X and Y axis and our Z axis. We can home them or change the direction. For example, if I do this, it's moving the bed, as you can see up here. And then if I'm going this way, it's moving the extruder. Then same thing here, raises the Z-axis or lowers the Z-axis. And that's by 10 millimeters based on the setting. If you switch it to 100, it'll do it by 100. There's also keyboard controls here, which do the same thing. So if I wanted to just use my arrows on my keyboard, I can do the same thing, which is what I'm doing now. And then obviously the home will home this on the X and Y axis here, and then this will home it on the Z axis. This select tool, I haven't been able to get to actually select it. Maybe it's just because there's only one hot end. It's just not necessary. I'll check out the documentation on that. But you can switch this out. So set it to 10 and then extrude and extract both work as expected when it's at temperature. Alright, so that covers the control tab. If you have any questions on it, please leave a comment below. I know we're kind of learning a little bit here together, just because I haven't used this, but that makes the videos better, in my opinion. Alright, so let's jump over to the GCode Viewer. This will basically just give you an overview of the actual G-code that's selected. So right now we have this test bridge. We can change our center and then allow it to zoom in on the model, but you can just zoom in with your mouse wheel as well instead of clicking this. And then there are a couple advanced sections down here. I haven't messed with these, so I don't know if there's much value. I just wanted to let you know that that is there. And then you have your reset options down there as well to go back to defaults. You can do your show previous or current layers as well. Again, I don't do that either. Sometimes I will go ahead and take a look and see what it's actually printing and how. So if you zoom in on this, if we go up layers, as you can see, it's just adding each layer. So it's kind of neat if you're trying to see what's going on. But it's only giving you that layer and the previous layer. I'm not a huge fan of this viewer. If I was actually trying to view this, I would go into Cura. Actually, let me pull that up again and go over to preview. The GCode Viewer here is much better. You can rotate, zoom in, zoom out, or whatever. Just get a better angle and look and see exactly what you're looking for. So you can go layer by layer. You can zoom in if you want to see exactly what's happening at the top. Or in this example here, this is actually a good example because, sorry, let me get here. If you can see right here, those two layers on this print specifically aren't actually attached to anything. So what that's going to be is a stringy mess if you don't use supports. So it's things like that that I would be looking for when looking at the preview mode or the GCode Viewer. But it's much better in Cura than it is in Octoprint, so just keep that in mind. You can see some of it there, just not all. You just get a much better user interface here in Cura. But I guess it is nice having it here if you wanted to see something really quick. Alright, going over to terminal. This is going to be the output from the actual console itself. So if you were to actually connect to the printer, this is what you would see. Main things are main thing being here your temperature, what it's set to, so your actual current and what it's set to, positioning and such. I'm looking up here to see if I can see one of the actual file loads. Actually, let's just set this to auto scroll. I'll go back over to control really quick. Let's go ahead and raise this up. Alright, so we just sent a couple commands. And then if we go over here, you can see that it sent the commands not really legible, at least for us, but the computer knows how to interpret them. I guess the main thing here is if you are having any errors or it's not doing what you would expect it to do, you might see an error in here, like, is that still in here? It doesn't save too much history. But if something wasn't working as expected, you can take a look in here really quick to see what the actual output from the printer was, and you'll typically see an error of some sort kind of indicating what the issue is. And then you do have some settings down here as well. If you wanted to suppress all the temperature messages or the SD status, basically cleaning this up a bit, you can do that. And then you can fake acknowledge. I haven't actually used this before, but it should be the same as sending an OK, but they don't recommend you using it. If you guys have used this area and if you guys have used that and have had luck with it, go ahead and leave a comment below kind of going over that. I would be curious to the use case for it and if you've had any issues with it. Alright, so next section here is going to be the time lapse. You've got basically the three modes: off, timed, and on Z change. Timed is going to be the standard one. It will basically, in this, with the default settings, take a snapshot every 10 seconds with a standard rate of 25 frames per second. And then at the end, if you wanted to have it record for however long, let's just say 10 seconds, just change that to 10 and it will add an additional 10 seconds of the image being there once it's done before stopping it. And then this will save it directly to wherever you have, and this will save it directly to the Octoprint server, and then it would show up down here, and you can either download them, delete them, or whatever the case may be. Alright, so let's jump over to on Z change. This is very specific to Octoprint, and if you're not actually running the print through Octoprint and you're just trying to monitor it, it won't work because it has to know where the changes are. It actually says that here. If you're printing off of the SD card, it won't work in any way because it's actually capturing an image every time the Z-axis raises, which you can't adjust that. Honestly though, I don't know what this really buys you. Personally, I think just the set time interval works just fine for most cases. If you were doing something creative or just wanted to play around, see how it works, you could use this. I guess if it's simple, I'll go ahead and go with that option, and timed is simple and it works. So I just haven't explored the other options much. And then again, off is off, it will do nothing. And same thing on the Z change. If your saves will be down at the bottom, you'll be able to download them or delete them or whatever the case may be. Alright, so now let's jump up to settings, which is this little wrench up here. I don't want to walk through all of these for the sake of time, but I wanted to walk through a couple key ones. Your printer profile, these are going to be the printers that you have set up. As you can see here, I have two. And the Ender 3 is the default one, which would come up. I could switch it over to the Taz just by hitting this, and then it will switch this guy. But whichever one has the star on this side is going to be the default printer that you would see right here first. Alright, then temperatures. The main things in here are going to be your presets. You can add additional presets too if you wanted, but this is where the 180 for PLA is set and then the 210 for the ABS filament set. I haven't had a need to change these, The 180 is kind of low. It might be worth bumping that up to 190 or 200. It's really more of a preference there. If it works fine for the filament you're using, you can go ahead and leave it. But this is where you would change it if you want to, or add additional presets. Under the G-code script here is where you can add any specific commands that you want it for different actions. So before a print starts, you can add a command to, I don't know, change temperature or something along those lines. You can get creative with this. Again, this is definitely more of an advanced thing. If you won't need to do this for most prints, but I wanted to let you know that it is here. You do have complete control over all of that. It's just not something you'll be using all the time. And then here, as an example, after print job is canceled, these are your default settings. So disable motors, disable heater, and disable fans. Under feature, the one thing that I typically change, which I haven't this time because I just wiped all of my settings for a video I did last week, is confirm before starting a print. This will basically just send a pop-up saying, are you sure you want to start the print? And then you have to acknowledge it. So it prevents you from accidentally starting it before you're wanting to. So let me go ahead and save that again. I do like that setting. Oops. Alright, and then these are some of the generic settings for your webcam if you have it set up. I wouldn't mess with any of this right now unless you had a specific reason to. Access control is where you would create additional users and groups if you wanted to be more restrictive on what people can do or what they can't do, or have more than one user. In most cases, I would recommend, well, in all cases, I would recommend having a user that you have to enter a password to get onto the server, just so that somebody can't connect to it and start messing around with things. But typically, one user is going to be enough, unless you have kids or something that you want them to be able to go in and check, I don't know, the time lapse or watch the video, but not actually kick off a print or something along those lines. And I guess in a commercial environment too, you could go all out with the access control, but for home use, there's really no need. Alright, so your API keys are actually, I'm going to have to wipe this afterwards, or at least reset these keys. But what they do is they allow applications to have programmatic access to Octoprint to do things. A good example would be the application key here for Cura. It has an API key as well, but this is how Cura actually talks to Octoprint. It's how it's identified. You can't just have a Cura instance on the network that can start printing to this without it actually being verified. I go over this in my initial setup video, so if you need more information or want more information on that, you can check it out there. Alright, now there's really only a couple more things that I wanted to go over down here. First one's going to be logging. If you have any issues with your printer or Octoprint, you would typically see it in here, or if it's plugin related, it would be in a different log, but you would just click on the log. This would be the most recent, and then you could download it, and then we could view it here. And this is just really all of the output from Octoprint. It's just giving you all of the data that it would typically be looking at. It's not relevant in most cases, but if you do have an issue somewhere, this is a good place to look to start troubleshooting it. Alright, now plugin manager. This here is going to be all your plugins you have installed. Octoprint does come with a handful of them that are set up by default, and then I have these two down here that I added myself, which is the change filament plugin and the preheat, which is preheat and change filament. So from here you could disable them, or you could do a uninstall, depending upon what you're trying to do. You can't uninstall the ones that come with Cura by default, but you can for the ones that you installed. But if you're looking to add new ones, let's just say you were wanting to install this change filament plugin as an example, you would go to Get More and then search for what you're looking for. So I mean, an example being, I just typed in filament, and then you would see everything related to that in here. And then if you wanted to install that filament, then if you wanted to install that plugin, you would just select it and hit install. The one that I was looking for is already installed, so it won't show up in this list, but let's say you wanted to add a filament sensor. You would just go to the one that you wanted. You can get more details on it or go to their homepage. I also showed you the license type, and then you can just go to install. It'll kick off the install, then you'll have to reboot Octoprint to actually for it to take effect. Alright, so let's close out of there. If you need any more information on plugins, or if you would like a list of recommended plugins, I can do that on a video coming up. Just let me know. Alright, now going down to software, this is where you would check for updated versions. Check for updates now. Everything's up to date, so there's not much here. But this is where you would see if something was out of date, installed version available. If there was a difference, it would have something saying update now, and then you would just update to that version. But it's just a nice clean interface to make sure you're on the latest version of that plugin or software. Just keep in mind that sometimes latest version's not always the best version. So if something just came out, I try to give it a little bit of time just to have the community vet it out before I go to it. Sometimes new code can cause issues, so just keep that in mind. If it's for a security update or something along those lines, I'm going to take that immediately. But if it's just for features, if I'm not specifically looking for that feature and wanted to take the risk, I'll let the community vet it out first. Alright, then backups and restores. Here's where you can take a backup of your configuration. I just did a backup now, and as you can see, that didn't take very long. Then you can see your backups up here, and then you can download those backups to save them offline. If you have an issue with the actual print server itself and you're trying to restore from it, if it's not offline, there's a chance you won't be able to get to it, so then it's kind of pointless. So you can restore from a backup that's offline here by just going here, browsing for it, and then uploading and then restoring it. So if you are taking a backup, let's say you're taking daily backups as an example, I would download them at least once a week and keep them somewhere else, or maybe once a month if you're not making too many changes. But just make sure you have a backup. That covers everything that I wanted to go over in here. Like I mentioned before, there is a lot here, but most of the sections are either self-explanatory or something that you typically won't use, and if you do, you're going to have to Google around for the information anyways. Alright, so let's go ahead and close out of this. Last thing here is you can go to your user settings to change your password and such here, as long with your API key. Also, or your language if you need it to. Let me close that, and then you can go over here to either shut down or reboot the system, or restart into safe mode if you're having issues. The restart Octoprint is pretty useful, especially if you're working with plugins like the change filament one, where your changes don't take effect until you actually do a restart. So having those options there are nice, so you can control it remotely. Again, the whole thing is being able to control it remotely and not have to go to the printer unless you're working on something there. Alright, so I know I covered a lot here in this amount of time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I'll try to help out as much as I can. Alright guys, so that covers everything you need to get started using Octoprint to control your 3D printer. As I mentioned in the video, I will leave a link in the description below to the video I did on how to set up Octoprint for the first time. So if you're just getting started with it or have any questions about the actual setup, check out that video. If you have any questions or feedback, make sure to leave a comment below and I'll get back to you within probably 24 to 48 hours. And I'll talk to you next time, but before we go and end this video, make sure you guys smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It'll really help us out. Thanks.